33, I recently attended my cousin's wedding, which would end up being a day I'd never forget. Everything was fine, at least on the surface, until the afterparty took a turn for the worse. The tension that had been lingering between my parents and me would soon come crashing down. See, my parents and I aren't exactly on the best terms. We've done our best to avoid each other, only making brief appearances at family gatherings when absolutely necessary. The cause of all this? My younger brother, Jack. He's the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who got everything he wanted. Meanwhile, I was left in the shadows, fighting for the smallest bit of attention. As he got older, his sense of entitlement only grew, and so did his obnoxious behavior. Needless to say, Jack and I aren't close at all, and honestly, I'm fine with that. He's a grown man child who still lives with our parents, spends his weekends playing video games with his online buddies, and has a constant stream of beer cans by his side. We don't speak, and that's how I like it. It all started at the wedding, when I was just sitting around with some relatives, enjoying the after-ceremony festivities. But then, like clockwork, my parents showed up, joining our little circle. It was a surprise, considering they usually keep their distance from me. I didn't think much of it, though. There were too many people around to make a scene. But then the conversation shifted, and suddenly, all eyes were on me. My dad asked how my job was going. I'm a banker, and not to brag, but I'd recently received a hefty raise and promotion. It was a big moment for me, but of course, it wasn't any of their business. So I gave him a vague answer, saying things were good, and that was that. But my parents weren't having it. My mom, in her ever-persistent way, asked if I had anything else to share. I told her no, but then my dad dropped a bombshell, revealing that he knew about the raise and promotion. I was caught off guard. I didn't want to discuss my personal life in front of everyone, especially not with them. So I tried to excuse myself, telling them I had to step away. But my dad wasn't done. He told me to sit back down and that we needed to talk like family. Those words struck me hard. Family? Really? The same family that had abandoned me when I asked for help with college tuition? I didn't see them as family anymore, not after all that had happened. They clearly didn't see me as one either, and they proved it when my father started accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. He said that despite my success, I couldn't even help them as they approached retirement. He played the victim, painting himself as a hard-working parent who had given me everything I wanted as a child. The hypocrisy stung. All my relatives were either staring at their phones or pretending to be interested in the floor, clearly uncomfortable. It was obvious what was happening. They were trying to humiliate me, force me into giving them money to save face. They thought that if they pressured me in front of everyone, I would cave. But I wasn't about to let them win. I couldn't just sit there in silence, not after everything they'd put me through. So I snapped. I reminded them of the years I spent asking for their help with my college tuition, only to be laughed in my face. They told me there was enough money for only one kid to go to college, and it wasn't going to be me. I had to figure things out on my own, and they actually laughed when I asked. It wasn't a joke to me then, but I guess to them it was. I was just a punchline, a joke to be discarded. But now that I was making more money and my brother was still mooching off them, they thought they could call in a favor. I wasn't having it. I reminded them of how little they'd given me, how they'd done the bare minimum for me, just enough to keep up appearances. They only provided for me until I turned 18, not out of kindness, but because they were legally obligated to. And now, they were acting as if they had done it out of the goodness of their hearts. I wasn't about to let them rewrite history. As I said this, I could feel the lump in my throat, the anger boiling inside me. I quickly excused myself, needing to step away before I completely lost control. When I came back, the area had cleared out. The crowd was gone. I went home that night, my mind racing, trying not to dwell on what had just happened. But then, a couple of days later, my brother reached out. He told me something that floored me. The fallout from the wedding conversation had spread like wildfire. Word had gotten out about the financial struggles my parents had been hiding. Apparently, they had borrowed money from relatives to cover my tuition and my brother's, promising to pay it back in a few years. But years had passed, and they never repaid a dime. The worst part? They'd lied to those relatives, telling them they were still struggling financially, when in reality, they were doing just fine. All that money? It was funding my brother's lifestyle, his endless partying, his new tech gadgets, his nights out with friends. The truth came out, and the relatives who had been waiting for repayment weren't happy. They'd filed lawsuits against my parents, demanding their money back. My brother, of course, wanted me to fix this, to tell them I had lied at the wedding. He wanted me to save face and convince everyone that I had been exaggerating, that I hadn't meant what I said. But I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their web of lies. I couldn't believe what was happening. My brother and my parents had just demanded that I help them out of the mess they'd gotten themselves into, because, apparently, I was the one who had put them in this situation in the first place. Can you imagine? They still had the nerve to act like I owed them something. They were upset because I had told my relatives the truth about how they hadn't paid for my college, and now they wanted me to cover up their lies. They thought it would be simple, have me lie and make everything go away. But I wasn't going to be their scapegoat. So, I blocked my brother and took the next step. I posted my side of the story online. I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative or manipulate anyone into believing they were the victims. I knew they'd try to do just that, so I made the first move. I didn't feel guilty about it either. I was simply sharing the truth. I figured anyone who'd lent them money, even if they weren't family, deserved to know the whole story. In a way, it felt like I was doing good by letting people see how manipulative they'd been. I'd always had to look out for myself in that house. No one else ever did. Now it was their turn to feel what I had felt. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My brother had actually tried to guilt trip me into lying to protect them. It's almost laughable that he thought it would work. But you know what? Even as I posted that update, I had a gut feeling that most people would agree with me. And when I saw the response, everyone stood by me. It felt so validating, and honestly, I was grateful for it. I knew I had done the right thing. A lot of you asked about the relatives my parents had borrowed money from. Honestly, I don't even know them. Never met them a day in my life. So I don't really understand why they decided to help my parents out. But it was clear that my parents had taken advantage of their kindness. Maybe those relatives were just good people. But my parents saw an opportunity and used them. I've been thinking about reaching out to those people to figure out why they gave my parents the money in the first place. But right now, not the best idea. I'm just hoping they have documentation or some proof that the money was supposed to be repaid. If they don't, I don't see how they even have a case against my parents, and that would be a real bummer for me. Another question that came up a lot was about my grandparents. Well, truth be told, I wasn't close to any of them. My mom's parents passed a few years ago, and my dad's parents are still alive, but I've never really had much of a relationship with them either. It's not like they helped me out either. Contrary to what some might think, my parents weren't the ones who helped me pay for college. That was all on me. I worked my way through, borrowed money from a few friends and their parents. Eventually, when I got my first job, I paid it all back. I never once asked for help from my parents, and that felt really disappointing. But at the end of the day, I did it on my own, and I can proudly say that I didn't need them. That's something I hold on to, something I'm proud of. So I guess that clears everything up. It answers all the questions you guys had about me and my life. What happens next with my parents and my brother? I have no idea, but whatever comes, I'll keep you all updated. I feel like you're part of this now. You're in it with me. And sure enough, 2 weeks after my first post, the storm really started to hit. Some of my relatives, the ones my parents owed money to, were actually suing them. Apparently, they had proof. And that's when things really took a turn. My parents were in deep legal trouble, but instead of focusing on defending themselves, they decided it was time to come after me. Yes, you heard that right. They tried to harass me, to get me to admit that everything I said about them was a lie. They wanted me to take their side, pretend like they were innocent, and that I was just making things up to make them look bad. A few days ago, my parents and my brother showed up at my door, probably thinking they could intimidate me into backing down. It was so typical of them. I knew they wouldn't come with good intentions, but I almost didn't answer the door. I saw them standing there, but my brother kept knocking. Eventually, I let them in, if only to stop the noise. I told them to make it quick. I wasn't about to waste my time. And that's when my dad dropped the bomb. He needed me to lie, to cover for them, to buy them time. They couldn't afford to pay everyone back at once, so I was supposed to be the one to save them. It was all so hypocritical. Now, all of a sudden, they were talking about family and reputation? Where had that been all these years? A real family talks to each other. They don't try to manipulate and use each other. I told them that I didn't consider them family anymore and that they needed to stop bringing it up. I could see right through what they were trying to do. They couldn't emotionally manipulate me into lying for them. They weren't going to guilt trip me into taking their side. No way. They were done with me. I wasn't falling for their tricks anymore. When the emotional manipulation didn't work, my brother upped the stakes. He threatened me, said he'd post damaging things online, try to ruin my career. It was pathetic. But I wasn't scared. I told him straight up that if he did that, I would file a defamation lawsuit. That got him to shut up real quick. But my mom? She got defensive. She told me I had no right to threaten my brother like that, especially after everything I had supposedly done to the family. But that was the thing. I hadn't done anything. They had brought this mess on themselves by borrowing money and not paying it back. They'd lied to everyone and tried to cover it up. And now they wanted to make me the scapegoat. I didn't raise my brother to be a spoiled, entitled brat with no ambition. That was on them. If they wanted to pat themselves on the back for how they raised him, they could do it without me. I told them all of this, straight to their faces. And then I told them to get the hell out of my house. They were wasting my time, and I had better things to do with my day off. But my brother wasn't done. He got right up in my face, trying to intimidate me. He said I wouldn't get away with this, that he was going to make sure of it. I almost laughed at him. He didn't know who he was messing with. It was totally hilarious to me. I couldn't help but laugh as I thought about what he could possibly do. Throw his video game controller at me? Or maybe have his group of 20-year-old online weirdos cyberbully me. It really set him off, especially when I casually told him that if he was going to get that close to people just to intimidate them, maybe he should brush his teeth more often. The color drained from his face. He turned bright red, and my mom had to drag him away, but I didn't feel bad about it. Not one bit. Watching him struggle to hold back was oddly satisfying because I knew he had absolutely no power in that moment. Neither did my parents, for that matter. It felt like such a huge victory for me. After all those years of being targeted by them, I was finally watching them beg for help. But there was no way I was going to help them. Not after everything. I wasn't going to forget how they laughed in my face when I asked them to help me pay for college. A few weeks passed, and I got an update. My parents had visited, and from what I was hearing, things weren't going well for them. Relatives had been gossiping that my parents had been going around, telling everyone they met about how hard it was to keep up with the bills, plus the lawyer fees. On top of that, they were stressing about how they would pay back the people they borrowed money from, especially since retirement was just around the corner. Talk about terrible timing. The easiest way out for them, it seemed, would have been to force my youngest brother to get a real job to actually contribute to the household. But of course, they weren't going to do that. They loved spoiling him, and let me tell you, they were succeeding. He was rotten to the core, and everyone could see it. But here's the kicker. They also started spreading this idea that I felt guilty about what happened at the wedding, that I regretted causing them trouble, and that I'd offered to pay for the lawyer. Of course, they claimed they'd rejected my offer, feeling insulted by me, and then bragged that I couldn't even buy my way out of their mess. Relatives started talking to me, some even saying they were impressed by my maturity and generosity, but they weren't sure if helping my parents was the best idea, considering how untrustworthy they were. I had to clear the air. I told them the truth, that my parents had lied. I didn't offer them any money. Instead, they approached me, begging me to help by lying and taking back what I said, just so they could buy themselves some time. Then my brother tried to threaten me, though it was unclear what he was actually trying to do. Regardless, when I told them the real story, it made way more sense to them than the fairy tale my parents had been spinning. And what struck me was how they still cared so much about how everyone saw them. They were drowning in legal trouble, yet their top priority was making me look like the villain. No one was buying it, though. It was all falling apart, but they didn't care. As long as people were talking about them, even if it was for all the wrong reasons, they were satisfied. Then came another update, and it was one I couldn't wait to share. The best news I'd heard in weeks. My parents lost all 3 of their legal battles. The people they owed money to were demanding repayment, and they had to pay up within the next few months. I couldn't stop smiling when I heard it. My relatives were the ones who spilled the beans, of course. They'd heard my parents whining about how I had ruined them, and now they were going to be penniless by the time they retired. Still, they blamed me for everything. I couldn't even wrap my head around the mental gymnastics it must take to believe such nonsense after everything that had happened. But then again, I wasn't surprised. I had always known that no matter how much they showered my brother with attention, it was me who they constantly tried to tear down and portray as the villain. They'd really worked overtime to make sure everyone knew just how terrible their lives were because of me. It was truly bizarre. No one had any sympathy for them. They weren't asking for help, they just wanted attention. They were enjoying the pity party, but didn't seem to care about the reason behind it, as long as people were talking. It was more clear than ever. This wasn't about getting their lives back on track. It was about getting as much attention as possible, regardless of how they got it. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any better, I heard the most glorious news. My brother finally had to get a job. That's right. He was working. After all these years of sitting around, playing video games, and avoiding any responsibility, he was forced into the workforce. And you know what? I felt like the king of the world. This was a moment I'd waited for my whole adult life, the moment when my brother would have to actually work for a living, just like I did when I was in college. I had to hustle through college, working as a cashier at a diner to pay my bills, while he had everything handed to him on a silver platter. But now, the tables had turned. He had to work at a video game store. Yes, a cashier there, of all places. Revenge, it seems, is a dish best served cold. I couldn't believe it when I heard the news, so I drove straight to the store to see it for myself. I even sacrificed my lunch to make the trip, but it was so worth it when I saw his face. The moment he saw me, I could see his face turn from confusion to anger. I didn't waste the opportunity to walk around the store, enjoying every second of making him uncomfortable. Sure, it was petty, but it felt so satisfying. Before I left, I even had to throw in a little jab. I asked him if our parents had cried on his first day at work, just like they did on his first day of school. He flipped me off and told me to leave, but honestly, it was worth it. That look on his face? Priceless. I don't think this year could possibly get any better.